It's a true story that I don't think it has a happy ending, but it's a story about what I would say is a delusionary expression of what faith is. As many, well, all of you may know, my home is in Maine, and a huge part of my life is my love of the ocean and my love of sailing, and my love of boats, and my love of people who spend time on boats. And one of the things I'm really good at, I know I'm good at this, is back home in Maine, I know pretty much every big boat, big sailboat that's regularly seen on the coast of Maine. I can tell from miles away whether that's the Angelique, or the Grace Bailey, or the Mary Day. I know all the schooners. And a few years ago, I was in Rockland and I saw a new, very large sailing craft at the dock. And I was sort of excited because I didn't know the boat. So I went down and took a look at it. It was a 3-masted wooden vessel, about 80 to 100 feet long. And when I got close to it, I had a great pause. Because I don't know how to say this, but as I looked at the details of the construction of this boat, it was just pathetically messed up in almost every detail. And the stern of the boat had the name Raw Faith. And as I looked at the boat, my immediate logical explanation was like, this has to be a cobbled together set piece for some movie somebody's filming. Because it has the elements of what might look like a boat, but anybody who knows anything about going to sea would not go to sea in this boat. I can't even go through the list of details that just made me marvel at the poor waste of wood and time that went into this thing. The bulwarks, the rails were made out of cheap 2x4s, nailed onto the side of the boats. The masts were clearly some kind of trashy spruce pulled out of the forest in Maine. They still were crooked. Whoever built it hadn't put spreaders on the mast, which would hold the shrouds up to keep the mast straight. Everything about it was wrong. And I was inclined to snicker and make fun of it until I heard the story behind it, and then I was just confused. And to make a long story short, the story behind it was there was a man way up in rural Maine who had a sad story to his life. His daughter had a debilitating neurological disease that left her in a wheelchair. And he had this dream of building a boat to take handicapped kids out sailing. A beautiful, beautiful dream. But in his execution of this dream of building the boat, he did nothing about learning about naval architecture, or how to build a proper vessel, or all the legal hurdles one must go to if you're going to build a boat that's actually going to take passengers on it, or on his own credentials as far as learning how to sail and perhaps getting a captain's license. He did none of those things. And I can't think of any place in the world better than Maine to meet people who know a lot about all those things. And he rejected all the expertise of all the wooden boat building experts and accomplished mariners up and down the coast of Maine, and he spent 3 or 4 years building this ship in his side yard, which once it was launched, he never painted, he never got proper sails for it, he never put a proper engine on it, he never learned how to sail, and every time the boat went out, it just blew downwind and had to get towed into port, which is how it wound up on the dock at Rockland when I first saw it. And let me explain something to you. I know some of you guys know this, but something of the physics of sailing. People often think that sailboats are just at the mercy of the wind. They just get blown downwind. Sometimes that's the case, but the vast majority of the time it's not. Leaves get blown downwind. Barn doors get blown open. Tumbleweeds go downwind. Sailboats, properly constructed and properly sailed, can go any place you want them to go. Any place you want them to go. One thing you can't do is sail directly into the wind, but you can get to a spot directly upwind by tacking back and forth. Once you know the physics of dynamic fluids and difference of pressure differentials and opposing forces, you can make a sailboat work. And the physics of sailing is much more like the physics of flying than the physics of a leaf being blown downwind. This boat was never built understanding the physics of sailing. This was built by somebody whose own faith allowed him to disregard all the observational realities that our culture has built over the last 1,000 years of going to sea, and he thought he would just ignore it and build this boat that never worked, that never got painted, and within 2 weeks, the bottom was covered with barnacles and seaweed, which made an unseaworthy boat even slower. His grand scheme was to sail the boats to the Caribbean via Bermuda. He waited until November, went to sea, lost both masts, had to get towed back to shore by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard condemned the boat, said it must not leave port. He said the whole world was crazy. 2 years later, he went and did it again. And the boat sank in early December off Cape Cod. And the Coast Guard rescued him and the other man on the boat. And now the boat we're all faith is on the bottom of the ocean. Probably where it belongs. I was last summer on a boat that I captained in Maine, a beautiful, well-built schooner, about almost 100 years old. It's been well-designed, well-sailed, well-cared for. And I was on the boat with a bunch of educators and scientists. And by the way, you guys who are asleep, you can just go. If you wake up somebody next to you, you can just go. If you don't want to be here, it's really okay. This boat was full of scientists who we had this great conversation about this marvelous place where we were sailing. And we came around one island where there's this beautiful granite island, and there's this giant rock about the size of the front of the chapel just placed on this precipice where everybody looked at it and said, how did that happen? And this one person who taught physics at MIT had retired, explained to me how what's called glacial erratics, where the glacier that covered that part of Maine 10,000 years ago, when it receded, left stones that it carried in random erratic places. And there was somebody else on the boat who was the head of the chemistry department at Middlebury College, and we were talking about the acidity of the ocean and potential changes that happen with climate change. And all these great conversations. And they asked me what I did, and I told them I'm actually a chaplain. And so they were very curious that I, as a person of faith, was very interested in science. And my short answer to them, and my answer to you, is that I see absolutely no problem between faith and science. I think that's a false choice. And just last week, I was helping Mr. Cheney drive his students up to the top of Mount Riga for your field studies class, and going through the woods and observing the facts that at the bottom of the mountain the trees were taller, there was deeper soil, more nutrients, all of things could be explained rationally. And at the top of the mountain the trees were smaller, the topsoil was thinner, and we could see through parts of the mountain actual bedrock where we saw scratches from the same series of glaciers that formed the shape of the coast of Maine. and formed Cape Cod and shaped these mountains here. And my appreciation of the natural world was only deepened. I don't see how faith in any way can be threatened by observational reality and logical thinking and awareness of the actual world in which we live. And I'm not tempted by the false choice to see a conflict where there isn't one. And it brings me right back to this moment, which for our Jewish brothers and sisters is the last day of the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, which can be imperfectly translated as New Year, the celebration of the New Year. But Jewish scholars and devout Jews will tell you that it is deeper than that. It goes back to the very beginning of creation, which includes the very beginning of profound awareness of what it actually means to be alive. And in this profound awareness, there is an intimate sense, almost like a whisper, but also can be imagined to expand to the deepest recesses of the universe, that is both intimate and awesome, and causes one to be overwhelmed with awe and joy at just the mere fact of being alive, in faith. And this reminds me that the most ancient prayers in both Judaism and Christianity and other religions are prayers without words. One of which is just called the Reverend, which is just a posture, which to me is a symbol of faith, that faith itself is a kind of posture in which we live our lives. A posture that is open to the reality that is bigger than our ability to comprehend, but at the same time centered in joy and this deep understanding that somehow each of our lives is precious beyond measure and that it matters how we live in all the moments of our life. And so the prayer I will leave with you this morning is a prayer with no words, of simple posture of faith and understanding. It looks like this. That, my friends, is faith.